go for it.
All right.
Can you see okay, Brianna? Hello, everyone. We're coming at you live from the Shaker Historical Society on this beautiful Saturday afternoon in Northeast Ohio. My name is Allison Henline, and I am the Education and Outreach Manager here at Shaker Historical Society. This is our artist that we have currently in our exhibition, Samantha Bias, and she's going to be talking a little bit about her exhibition that we're hosting here, All That Remains. So we're going to turn it over to her, and she's going to give you a quick presentation on her different styles and techniques and how she came to get into this sort of art. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments. They will pop up and we'll be able to ask them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Samantha Bias.
Thank you, Allison. All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Samantha Bias, and I'm here at the Shaker Historical Museum. One second.
Society, this is Allison speaking. How can I help you? Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to get started here. Sorry about that, everybody. Some difficulties there. Hey, I hope everybody's having a great Saturday afternoon. I'm here doing an artist talk at the museum, and I kind of wanted to go over some awesome stuff about the show, things that I've learned, and why I created this body of work during quarantine this year. So, as you can see on your screen here, I have a presentation for All That Remains, and we are going to get started. So, All That Remains is a realization of self during a time of solitude. This work was an exploration of fragility and the relationship between human nature and a longing for human connection. So, a lot of the work shows a depiction of loneliness, kind of like I felt that, I took for granted a lot of the things that were available to me before quarantine. And now that those things are not available anymore, I felt that I wanted to depict that loneliness and solitude of that time period. So today we're going to be discussing the interrelation and the creative process that affected me during the pandemic, that affected a lot of us artists. And that is one of the first pieces that I created. It was a self-portrait of my eyes on skeleton leaves. So this piece that you're seeing here is called Curl, and it is a self-portrait that I did about March 2020. The piece is about 2 inches. It is on a waxwood leaf, and it's a real leaf. I usually use a lot of ephemeral objects in my work, and before this I was doing chlorophyll process, which is using live leaves and using the chemistry in the leaves to create long-lasting images. On the pieces that you see here, they've already faded and passed away, so I use them to create long-lasting images using inks and things like that. So this is Curl. This is one of my favorite pieces. So as I said, a lot of my work is ephemeral. As a child, I played a lot outdoors, and I discovered a lot of different things in my environment, and I use them a lot in my artwork as a child as well. So this was really a look inside of myself, this body of work. So I wanted to go ahead and share that experience with you. I work in Cleveland and I live in Cleveland. I've lived here my whole life. I spent a year in New York City, but something just drew me back here to the city which I was born. So a lot of my work is from things and places around Cleveland, people that live in Cleveland and stuff like that. So everything is very locally sourced. It is sustainable, and that has become a growing and more important part of my work as I kept creating throughout the last couple years. Before I started doing photography such as this, I was a painter for about 12 years. So this is a fairly new experience for me. So I've been diving deep into alternative photography, and this body of work was created using different processes that I will talk about later in the presentation. So my early discovery of alternative photography started with cyanotypes, which I'm collaborating right now with the museum, and we're going to be doing kits and at-home work for an at-home workshop with cyanotypes, which we will be talking more about later in the show. But that's where I started. I started using photosensitive material and ephemeral objects on paper, and that's kind of what led me into alternative photography because I always enjoyed film and digital photography, but I was like, I knew that there was something more to this, and so I started looking at more primitive photography, and that kind of led me down the rabbit hole and where I ended up today. So that's where it started, was cyanotypes. Next, I started to think about the chemicals in the different, the harsh chemicals in photosensitive chemistry and things like that, and how that can be harmful to the environment and to myself. So I thought about plants and how they have natural chemicals and stuff like that in their own body, like in leaves and stuff like that, the chlorophyll in the leaves. So I started to crush up leaves and use that as like a paste. And I started using that as my photosensitive material. And those are called anthotypes. So I just that is when I really started to think about how my environment impacts my art and how my art impacts the environment. That led me into my chlorophyll process, which is using the actual leaves and a photosensitive material and leaves to create lasting images. And thus I started really creating art that can be either composted or it just eventually fades away. So it really led me down the path of more sustainable creative art. And then from there, I started to do photographic transfers, and that's what you're seeing on the skeleton leaves today. So that was kind of my little path to where I ended up at this time, and a lot of darkroom practices, such as cameraless photography, because none of my photography uses a camera after creating the large format negatives. So I just thought that was really interesting. And also other solar graphic photographies, such as the cyanotypes, the anthotypes, and the chlorophyll process. So here we have anthotypes and cyanotypes, and on your screen on the right, you'll see the hands, and that was actually created using beet juice, which I thought was really cool. That exposure time ranged from anywhere from 4 to 14 days, so it was a long process, but I just thought that was really, really neat. That dates way back in like the early 1800s, and following after anthotypes were created, cyanotypes were created, which are basically blueprints that they used way back in the day to save on money. It was fast, it was easy, and I use it as my artistic expression. So that is a series of 125 self-portraits kind of zoomed in that you see on your screen. So there now you see a chlorophyll process. So you'll see the difference that is on a live leaf. Basically, my large format negatives block out the sun and create a long lasting image by sun bleaching at the same time. That exposure process is anywhere from a few hours to a few days, and that is completely compostable and that is completely sustainable. No inks, nothing was used, and I don't preserve those pieces. So eventually they can be composted later in their life. Next, you'll see that's my archival pigment printing. That's kind of like what was left over from transferring from the leaf from the paper. So that is actually on the paper, and that's kind of like the negative that was created during that time. So you can kind of see the veins in the leaf from the leftover inks from that photo transferring, which is basically just contact transferring ink to an object. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, about how I create my skeleton leaf archival pigment prints. So it's actually a very simple process. I use laser inks on an object by basically printing on it and using heat and pressure. The ink is adhered to the remaining veins of the leaf, and you can basically only see the image with a dark background. When I had first done this experiment, I kind of held it up to the light and I couldn't see an image. So I thought that I had failed in this experiment. That's when I set down the leaf in disappointment, luckily on a dark background, and I saw the image, and then I knew that I had kind of came up with something cool. So that was really neat. Something that I thought I had failed in, I succeeded, and it kind of blossomed into this project. And like I said, the image must be presented with a dark background and it fades away in light, which was kind of also a little bit of a metaphor, for what I was going through at the time. The pieces that you'll see in the show are all museum archived in UV protective glass and acid free backing for the longevity of the work because it is an organic material, so it can deteriorate over time. But the skeleton leaves specifically have been preserved in a way that I didn't use chemicals. It was just basically my framing that keeps the piece intact. So moving on, uh, as a lot of artists know, and everybody knows that what has been going on, and a lot of people were calling this year that big chunk of where we kind of had to stay home was the Great Pause. And when that all started happening, I was at home and I saw all my artist friends like bursting with creativity, and I was feeling a lot of anxiety and fear. So I wasn't really creating anything for a while. I was kind of at home trying to figure out who I was at the time and where I was going because I didn't have my work or anything to kind of keep me preoccupied. So I just kind of fell into a huge funk and I started cleaning my room, like cleaning out my studio and stuff. And I had happened upon a stack of skeleton leaves that I just had for crafting and stuff like that. And this is kind of where it led me into using the leaves for this project. And it's really comes down to not like making yourself create art and kind of letting it come to you. That's the best, most organic way to create and the most honest way, I feel. I was like trying to force myself to paint and everything was just not coming out right. So that's, you have to let yourself kind of fall into your art and let your art find you and don't force it. So, really, this ended up becoming a really historical body of work because of what's happening right now. As you see, this was kind of a project born from yearning to create during a time where I had unlimited time, but nothing was coming out. So luckily, I was able to burst through that creative block and really start working on what was happening inside and putting that out in front of myself to see and understand and accept. So really, when there's nothing left, there's only you, and that's really kind of where this came from. A lot of the works that you'll see, there's pieces missing, um, and that was kind of how I was feeling. And you can see something through basically nothing, which is the lacy parts of the leaf and the only parts that are remaining. So that's kind of where I came up with the idea for the slogan for the show. So really, I hope this kind of spoke to you. It is something that was really important to me. This was my first time ever showing work like this in the public view. It really was a labor of love and understanding and patience with myself to extend that to you. And I am very transparent about how I create things because I think that it's important for people to understand the where, why, and how of creating. So I thank you so much. At this time, if we have any questions or anything, we can go over some questions and let's see what we got.
So our first question is one. So these are all questions that we got from our visitors that came in over the past week.
Okay.
So the first question is, do you find the skeleton leaves, or do something to the leaves to make them that way?
Okay, that's a great question. Most of my leaves are bought. I have found some of my leaves, and I'm experimenting with that. But the leaves that are used for this show are called Bodhi leaves. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but that's what they're called. And they aren't. I don't know of any trees in Ohio that would give me those kind of leaves. And then also we have magnolia leaves, which aren't that prevalent in Ohio as well. So those are purchased at the time. But in the fall, now I'm starting to look and find my own skeleton leaves, and it has to go through like a bleaching process and stuff to get it that white. So at the time these were purchased, but they are real leaves. And yeah, so that I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. Do the types of leaves you choose have any significance to your art? So you mentioned a couple different leaves. Do you use like, I know you mentioned like in the fall, like the maple leaves are really big and pretty. Do those have like any sort of like significance to the pieces that go onto them, or?
Yeah, so like I said, the Bodhi leaves, actually the story behind those are that um it is said that Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and came to enlightenment. And they're also called like heart leaves, so upside down you would see they're kind of in the shape of a heart. So I felt like that was kind of, since I was going through a lot during that time, I was coming to a conclusion and a realization. So that's kind of the correlation between my leaves and the work.
So you mentioned that you bought the leaves. Where or you purchase them like within the United States, or I know you mentioned that they were from like ancient Buddhists. Where in the world did they come from?
Yeah, I usually try to find local sellers and makers on like Etsy or things like that. I always try to stick with local sources or something close by so that I limit my carbon footprint. So everything, including the framing and all, were local, mostly women-owned businesses that I purchased from.
That's awesome. Do you have any advice for people who want to try alternative photography processing?
Oh, that's a great question. So, my advice to you is to be patient and keep experimenting because alternative photography is different every single time. You're never going to be able to make the same two pieces. So, it really comes down to really a lot of experimentation, a lot of failure, and letting yourself fail and learn from that. There's no real method to the madness. It's just kind of just try a bunch of different things, different ways, and see how it turns out. Don't be disappointed if it doesn't end up perfect the first time.
That's awesome advice.
Thanks.
So following up on that, how does like experimentation and failure like impact your work? Does it, do you find something that accidentally worked and then you're like, oh, I want to try and do that again, sort of thing, or?
Yeah. Um, Honestly, the first time I really tried alternative photography, especially like my chlorophyll process and this as well, it was really born out of failure. I tried dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I'm like, this is not possible. Like, this is not going to work. And then I finally figured it out and I had my aha moment. Um, I think that it was, I mean, the whole idea of failure and trying again has been my whole life, basically. Uh, so it's it just shows a lot of vigor and like I'm going to do this and this has to work and I'm just gonna keep trying until I get it.
So there's perseverance.
Yes, lots of perseverance.
Lots of perseverance. Okay, so how has being an art educator had an impact on your process or your style? You mentioned you were a painter for a very long time. Has that impacted your style with this sort of alternative photography processing?
Well, yeah. Actually, my first uh, ever project was of my students. I actually took photographs of my students as like trying it out for my chlorophyll process. So I did a bunch of portraits of my students, and then I did a work called Nature versus Nurture. And so they personally impacted my work. Um, as an educator, I guess it can be hard sometimes to make time for your own art because especially when you're teaching art because you're giving all of your knowledge and your energy to other people. So I found it really hard to create for myself at the time. So that impacted my work a lot. Um, but it also kind of led me to different avenues and like I could experiment with my kids and we could all kind of try together to come up with different ideas and techniques and we could bounce ideas off of each other. So yeah, my actual work impacts my artistic vision a lot in many different ways.
Now, do you still paint at all, or is it mainly alternative photography processing?
Yeah, I get that question a lot because I do have a lot of people that have followed me from the beginning and they really love my watercolor portraits. But yeah, I do still paint. Right now, I'm putting a lot of energy in my photography because it's something new and exciting. But painting is always a really big part of me, and I paint a lot in the winter because after the summer happens, I only have a small window to create my chlorophyll process and my leaf processes. So I basically only have 2 months out of the year to do that. So I have all this extra time. So I'm like, how am I going to still be creating art? Because I just feel like I have to. It's just like something that I need to do. So that's when I kind of fall back on painting. And it's always there. And people have commissioned me recently that I haven't really shared because that's more personal with the client. But I do still paint, and it's always been like a really big part of me, and that'll never ever change.
It's really like inspiring to hear. So it's really interesting. So you literally only have 2 months out of the year to do this alternative processing,
Yeah.
and you just mentioned that you paint all throughout the rest of the year. Is like I know that we're so a little shameless plug. We're doing this cyanotype kit. Is that something that could also be done any time of year, or is that also a very small window?
It depends. So, um, basically, for our cyanotype workshop that we're going to be doing, you need the sun, but for cyanotypes, you can use UV, like false light, fake light, or whatever you want to call it, and so at home. So there are ways to do it during the more gloomier months out of the year, but personally I like to work specifically with the sun. It's faster, it costs nothing, stuff like that. So you can do cyanotypes in the winter if it's a sunny day. So all you really need is the sun for that. for my chlorophyll process, you need the both UVA and UVB light, which the sun gives off, and not all false lights do. So that you have to have the sun for. So that's why that process is only a couple months out of the year, because summer makes for the most intense light. I have the blooms to use and things like that, but cyanotypes are great because they're fast and all you need is the sun. So yeah, that can be done throughout the year as long as you have a sunny day.
Awesome. So this
Yeah.
was one that we had during your presentation when you
Okay.
mentioned that there were pieces missing and the title of the show is All That Remains. Do you
Mhm.
manufacture the pieces missing, or do you like go in and punch those out? Or do you again like buy them like that or find them in the wild like that, or
Like the actual leaves?
yeah.
They are like that when I get them.
Okay.
So I don't have to basically do anything for that part. It's almost like working with paper, but a very, very fine paper. So I don't have to do anything with it at the time, but I am learning how to do my own so that I can create my own. But it's harder because the leaves that I have are very lacy, which really are able to capture the image and the ink well. When you have less of that, then it becomes more abstract, which could definitely be something to explore. So that to answer your question, yeah, it just comes like that.
Awesome. So I think that was the end of our questions.
Okay.
But before we wrap things up, another plug for our take-home cyanotype kit. Our registration ends September 20th, and if you wanted to find out more information, you can check out our Facebook page, or information is also available on our website, shakerhistory.org. So
Awesome.
if you wanted to take it away and finish on up.
All right. So I thank everybody for tuning in today. I hope you have a great rest of your Saturday. Um, Definitely come in and check out the show. All pieces are for sale. So you can put one in your home office since you're going to be home a lot more often. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.